The train was crowded, but not one person offered her a seat. An elderly black woman stood quietly, gripping her old leather bag as whispers and mocking smiles filled the air. They thought she was just another tired passenger, someone easy to ignore. But as the train rattled forward, her calm eyes hid a secret that none of them could have imagined. When she finally opened her bag, the entire carriage fell silent. No one laughed after that. It was just another busy morning on the downtown train. People glued to their phones, pretending not to notice the world around them. Among them stood an elderly black woman named Clara Mae Williams, 74 years old, her back slightly bent but her spirit unbroken. She had taken this train every day for years, always early, always quiet, always polite. That morning, the train was unusually packed. A few teenagers laughed loudly at videos on their phones. A businessman argued into his headset about quarterly numbers. Seats were taken, but not all by those who needed them. When Clara stepped in, no one moved. She glanced at the empty seat beside a young woman who avoided her gaze. Another man pretended to sleep. Clara smiled faintly, the kind of smile worn by someone used to being invisible. The train jerked forward, and she gripped the cold metal pole to steady herself. Her bag, an old brown leather satchel with frayed edges, rested against her chest. Inside, she carried something precious, though no one would have guessed. As the minutes passed, the whispers began. A few passengers nudged each other, joking quietly. One muttered, "She's fine, she doesn't look that old." Another laughed, "Maybe she's just acting for sympathy." Clara didn't respond. Her eyes stayed calm, her breathing steady. She had lived through enough to know silence sometimes speaks louder than anger. Outside, the city blurred by tall glass buildings, flashing billboards, and streets filled with people who would never know her name. Inside that train, however, a story was about to unfold that none of them would ever forget, because that worn leather bag she held carried something that would turn their shame into silence, and their arrogance into awe. The train rattled deeper into the city. People shuffled in and out at every stop, but still, no one offered Clara a seat. Her hands trembled slightly from fatigue, not from weakness, but from the weight of the years she carried. She had lived through segregation, through protests, through nights of fear and mornings of hope. Yet here she was, decades later, still standing while others sat, as if history had looped back around. A group of young passengers near the middle of the carriage began to whisper louder now. One of them, a man in his 20s with a baseball cap turned backward, pointed at Clara and laughed. "What's she even doing here this early?" he said, his tone mocking. His friends chuckled, pretending not to notice her eyes glancing in their direction. Another passenger, a woman dressed sharply in business attire, rolled her eyes. "It's not that serious," she muttered. "Everyone's tired." But her voice lacked conviction. Deep down, even she knew there was something cruel about pretending not to see. Clara adjusted her bag and stared out the window. Her reflection looked back at her, calm, poised, and older than time itself. She thought of her late husband James, who used to say, "Grace isn't silence, Clara. It's knowing when to speak without words." The train hit a sharp turn. She nearly lost her balance, her thin hands gripping the pole tight. Still, not a single person moved. For a moment, the young man with the cap looked at her, then turned back to his phone, but not everyone ignored her. Near the far end of the carriage, a boy, no older than 12, watched silently. His mother, seated beside him, whispered, "Don't stare, baby." Yet the boy couldn't look away. Something about the woman, her posture, her quiet dignity, made him feel uneasy, even guilty. As the train rolled on, tension thickened in the air. Clara could feel the eyes, the judgment, the indifference pressing on her from all sides. Yet she didn't break. Every jolt of the train, every smirk, every dismissive glance only reminded her of how far she'd come, from marsh in Montgomery to nights spent hiding from hate she never deserved. And then, a sharp voice cut through the carriage. "Ma'am, maybe you should just ask someone to move," said a young woman impatiently. Clara turned slowly. Her eyes, calm, deep, and unshaken, met the woman's. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Clara smiled, that same quiet smile that disarmed cruelty without a word. "No, dear," she said softly. "Some lessons are best learned standing." The woman blinked, unsure how to respond. The young man stopped laughing. The child's eyes widened. Something in Clara's tone, steady and timeless, carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. But before anyone could speak again, the train slowed, screeching toward the next station. Clara glanced at the sign outside, Jefferson Street, and her fingers brushed the old brass clasp of her bag. That bag. The one she never left home without. She took a slow breath. It was almost time. The group that had mocked her just minutes ago now watched, curiously, as she loosened her grip on the pole and reached for her satchel. The boy leaned forward. The businessman took off his headset. Even the woman who told her to ask for a seat stared, frozen dot when Clara gently set the bag on the seat in front of her. The soft thud echoed louder than words. The train was dead silent. No laughter, no whispers, just the sound of the rails beneath them. She opened it halfway. A glimmer of gold caught the light. For a split second, all anyone saw was something shining, a reflection of history, of honor, of sacrifice. Then the bag clicked shut again. The young man in the cap looked confused. "What was that?" he asked under his breath. Clara didn't answer. She just looked out the window again, as if waiting for the world to catch up with the truth. And in the next stop, when she finally opened that bag fully, every passenger on that train would rise, not from guilt, not from pity, but from something far more powerful, respect. The train slowed, metal wheels screeching against the tracks, as a faint announcement echoed through the speakers. But no one heard it. Every eye was fixed on the old woman, on that weathered brown bag resting on her knees. Clara May Williams took a deep breath. Her fingers, wrinkled but steady, unclasped the brass lock once more. The air inside the carriage seemed to still, as if time itself paused to listen. She reached in and slowly pulled out a folded piece of deep blue fabric, wrapped carefully around something heavy. She laid it across her lap and unfolded it with reverence. Gasps rippled through the carriage. There, resting in her lap, was a Medal of Honor, glimmering softly in the light that filtered through the train's window. Beside it, a faded photograph of a young man in uniform, her husband, James Williams, one of the first black combat medics to serve in Vietnam. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but clear. "He saved 47 men in one night," she said softly. "But when he came home, they didn't let him sit on the bus." The businessman's eyes dropped to the floor. The young woman covered her mouth. The boy's eyes filled with tears as his mother reached for his hand. Clara looked down at the medal again, her fingers tracing its edge. "They told me to bury him with it," she whispered. "But I carry it with me instead, because it reminds me what standing up really means." Silence swallowed the entire train. The young man with the cap, the one who had laughed the loudest, now stood up, guilt written all over his face. "Ma'am, please," he said softly, motioning toward his seat. "Take mine." Clara smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, son," she said, her voice trembling with grace. As she sat down, the train began moving again. But the air inside had changed, heavy, humbled, human. People wiped their eyes discreetly. Some bowed their heads. No one spoke another cruel word. The little boy walked over and whispered, "My grandpa was a soldier too." Clara looked at him, her tired eyes softening. "Then, you know," she said gently, "some battles are fought without a weapon." When the train reached the next stop, every passenger rose to their feet, not out of pity, not out of guilt, but out of respect for the woman who reminded them what true honor looks like. The train rolled into its final station. The brakes hissed softly as it came to a stop, but no one rushed to leave. Everyone remained standing, still processing what they had just witnessed. Clara May Williams stood slowly, her frail hands clutching the medal and the photograph close to her heart. The same passengers who once ignored her now stepped aside, creating a clear path to the door. The businessman who had refused her a seat earlier approached her with trembling hands. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "My father served too. I should have known better." Clara looked into his eyes, her face calm and forgiving. "You know now," she said simply. "That's enough." A young woman reached out to steady Clara as she walked, whispering, "You remind me of my grandmother. She used to tell stories about marching for freedom." Clara smiled softly. "Then she's the reason you're standing today." At the door, the little boy tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mom, can we give her something?" He pulled a small American flag pin from his backpack and handed it to Clara. Clara looked down, touched beyond words. "Thank you, child. That's the kind of honor we need more of." As the train doors opened, sunlight spilled into the car. Clara stepped out slowly, her reflection gliding across the metal walls, not as a forgotten woman, but as a living legacy of sacrifice and grace, one by one. Every passenger turned toward her, watching in silence as she walked away. No applause, no words, just respect. The young man in the cap sank back into his seat, eyes red. "I'll never forget this," he murmured. The mother nodded, holding her son close. "Neither will he." And when the train began to move again, the space where Clara had stood seemed to glow a little brighter, a reminder that humanity still lives where hearts choose to see. Moral: never judge by what you see, because behind every face is a story, and behind every story, a sacrifice you may never understand.